Ho ho ho, ladies and gentlemen! Welcome back to this year's Dev Diary Holiday Special. Now, last time we started work on our weird little match 3 action game. The basics were constructed, allowing the player to swing their stick at presents, moving them from column to column as they stack over time. There were also some odd collision issues to deal with, which forced a detour or two, but in the end we managed to finish the basics. And so today we'll be adding on to those basics with more key features. The first being enemies, which will constantly swarm the player doing their thing. We'll also add elements of the match 3 system so we can have everything begin to interact with one another. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. Enemies were up first, so an enemy spawner was added to the ticker function. Much like the presents, the enemy would spawn at a random location at the edge of the room. Then in the enemy code, everything we'd need for a basic enemy unit was added. This included basic movement to constantly move towards the player, a knockback system for when they're struck, and our usual hurt system. Movement direction would also be dependent on the knockback state. And we were starting off strong with this code, thankfully working without issue. Much like the present's last episode, the enemies would eventually swarm in on the player, who can simply only swat them away. So back in the enemy code, the same squish check used for the player was added, only instead of resetting the game, the enemy was simply destroyed. In other words, our player now had a way to dispatch of enemies. Squish them between 2 presents. It's a little dark for a holiday themed game, but well, the North Pole be cold, yo. Anyway, with that working, it was back to the code for more tweaking. Up next was an attempt to code a match 3 system, aka my kryptonite. I've never been able to create something that was satisfying to use, but here we are. The check was as simple as detecting presents above and below. If both exist and are not moving, it's safe to assume they're idle. And so if they also match types, then all 3 presents would be destroyed. Testing this with just 1 present type worked well enough. Presents that started to stack in 3s would be deleted and the entire system would continue flowing like normal. So back in the code, a new type was added to the present. For now that new type was a cookie, it'll probably be changed in the future. I have no idea. What I did know was the system seemed to be holding up. Presents would only disappear when 3 of a vertical column have been detected, meaning that somehow I managed to make a match 3 system that didn't drive me crazy in the process. I mean, it wasn't very pretty, but functionally it worked and so we could move on. Next was detecting the secondary fail state of our game, present overload. So if a present was detected at the tippity top of a column and it wasn't moving, it seemed safe to assume that the column was full and thus game over. And this in practice was a lot less successful. And much like last episode, a ton of different approaches were made to solve the issue. And once again, the problem was twofold. The first issue was the constant switching of the drop state for presents. If 2 presents are spawned back to back, there's a possibility of a frame or 2 where the second present detects the first below it. This stops its movement. And if the movement stops too close to the top of the screen, because the present drop speeds are slow, this would falsely flag the column as being full. And after about an hour of ups and downs, a potential solution was finally figured out. 3 checks would be made. A present would first check for another present below their position, and if neither are moving, and the top present is above a certain Y position, then it was safe to assume that the column was full. And once I could confirm that this worked, it was then combined into the drop state check to consolidate everything into as few events as possible. Honestly, I have no idea if I'm just having a massive brain fart here. It's kind of been a while since I've had to get specific with dynamic collisions and the like. However, all things considered, the system seemed to be working, and despite the massive struggle, we're now able to experience the basics of our little match 3 action game. The player can swing on both presents and enemies, both of which have their own purposes. Presents will now disappear when stacked in 3s, and the enemies don't do much except annoy the player for now, but that'll change later. In fact, many things may still be changed in the future because I'm not sure if it's harder to match 3 for points or to try and prevent the matches from occurring altogether. But alas, these are questions for another time because this brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already. And let me hear your ideas of how I could have improved the overflow check. And also, what do you think of the progress so far? Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.